Welcome to our study of Journey Without Goal, the Tantric wisdom of the Buddha. And as always, kindly generate the awareness of how what we're studying here has importance in terms of addressing suffering as it exists universally. That is what we're doing with the Buddha Dharma, getting to the bottom of what drives suffering for ourselves and for others, so that we call preparation with bodhicitta. And then we would say that is actually part of what we call then the three excellences, or Dampa Sum, which are then the three excellences being preparation with bodhicitta, and then the main part, without reference point or without distraction, basically listening without being distracted, and then at the end, dedication. Acknowledging that what we're doing is not something that's intended to enhance us, but really which is for the purpose of others and the well-being of others, ourselves included, obviously, but that sort of giving it away is what we then call dedication. So we begin with that. As far as the study goes, we're at the very last section of the book, Marpa's praise to his teachers. And before we do that or begin that, we'll, as usual, we'll start with the devotional liturgy at the beginning of the work, where we invoke the masters of what we call the 8 chariots of the practice lineages. And then on the basis of having invoked them, we supplicate really that all the essential elements of the path may be accomplished. And so presently we're in a section which very much is about acknowledging our own shortcomings. So we'll look at that. This, by the way, is Tilopa, who was the guru of Marpa. So he's going to be mentioned in the section that we're going to be looking at. Let's see. Good morning, La. Okay. So I think this is where we got to. So Jamgon Kongtrul writes, I don't realize my bad faults. I maintain the form of a practitioner while engaging in various non-dharmic pursuits. Because of the kleshas, I'm naturally accustomed to unvirtuous actions. Again and again, I give birth to a mind of virtue, but again and again, it falls apart. Guru, think of me. Look upon me quickly with compassion. Grant your blessings so that I see my own faults. So we're actually situated in a place between samsara and nirvana, which is called the path. So we would say in samsara we're confused, in nirvana we're no longer confused, and on the path we have a mixed bag. And that's where it's important that as we're practicing the path, that we're very aware of where our shortcomings lie, and the degree to which we could be aware of them, to the degree to which we can actually take out our shortcomings and look at them, give them a hard stare, to that degree we're actually free of them. And so that's why it's so important to have this ability to expose one's own shortcomings. It's so liberating. The moment that we're trying to defend our position, that's very much coming from the sad place of insecurity. If we're engaging in neurotic action, which we inevitably do, not because we're bad persons, but just because we, in confusion, have habituated ourselves to neurotic action, then presently, as we're freeing ourselves from that pattern, to defend it or to try to justify it is actually very much subscribing to the mindset that has held us back. So the degree to which we could actually expose it and say, hey, I have anger. Gosh, I have a lot of anger. Gosh, I have a lot of desire. Wow, I'm a I'm a rather poverty-stricken, jealous person, etc. Is not actually putting ourselves down, but it's freeing ourselves from the habit by, you could say, externalizing it or objectifying it, and really from the place of our ground nature being pure and free from these styles of engaging in and perpetuating neurosis. From that position, we could actually look at them and simply see these as fleeting conditions of tainted confusion, and in that way we're no longer caught by it. And so to be able to expose our shortcomings is very much part of the path. Because the beauty of the Buddhist teaching is that it is so accommodated. It is not as if you're an anomaly if you fall short of in the sense of the discipline of the path. So, for example, in the monastic tradition, there's bi-monthly restoration of the vows, and also in Vajrayana, there's the practice of a feast or sok, which is then also restoring the vows, the commitments. So, we don't have to hesitate in terms of just being very clear on there are things that need to be abandoned and there are things that need to be accomplished. And that's why we also shouldn't confuse the two levels of truth, because of course in absolute truth there's nothing to abandon, there's nothing to accomplish. But at the level of the path and the level of us actually starting where we are and being where we are and relating with the stuff of the path, then it makes a lot of sense to expose these shortcomings and basically get on with it. So we don't necessarily define ourselves in terms of our shortcomings, but we rather free ourselves from them and get on with the path. So we say, we acknowledge we don't realize our bad faults. We are practitioners, and yet we fall back into, habitual patterns, non-dharmic pursuits. And this comes from confusion, the kleshas. And these are what we have accustomed ourselves to. These are the habitual patterns. And while we do aspire to the path, then again and again we fall into habitual patterns, which is again something that we acknowledge. So we're quite straightforward in recognizing this fact. Again and again I give birth to a mind of virtue, but again and again it falls apart. Again, this does not mean we're defined in these terms, but it does mean this is something that we need to acknowledge and get over. So we're not alone. We supplicate the teacher to look upon us with compassion and grant our blessings that we may see our own faults, not be deceived, not perpetuate this self-deception that is samsara. Jakob also says, as each day passes, my death is nearer and nearer. As each day passes, my being is harsher and harsher. Though I attend my guru, my devotion becomes gradually obscured. Love, affection, and sacred outlook become toward my Dharma companions, grow smaller and smaller. Guru, think of me, look upon me quickly with compassion. Grant your blessing so that I tame my stubborn nature. So the inevitable approach of death is something that we very often are oblivious to, and as practitioners, a big danger that we could become jaded, that we've been around something really sacred with tremendous vision and clarity, and yet we just treat it as another object And that's where our being could become harsher and harsher. So that's where we could stay around a teacher, and yet being jaded, we actually miss so much of the teacher's brilliance. So often around a teacher there is this, which is really basic to the human condition. There is a great teacher. The teacher needs to operate within this world as an organization, and then very often the organization, the persons, but being part of that organizations, begin to treat it without an awareness of its sacred nature. And that's where you have this sort of phenomenon of politics around teachers and ambition and these kind of sad phenomena. There's a famous line by the 15th Karmapa, Chögyam, who said, "Whoever sees me, the doors to whoever sees me, the doors to the lower realms are closed. Whoever stays around me, the doors to the higher realms are closed." so around the Karmapa there would have been a fair bit of, you could say, the politics and so on. But anyway, that of course doesn't mean that the innate quality of the teacher in any way is corrupted, and or the teaching is corrupted in any way. This is just, again, a phenomenon that we need to be aware of in terms of ourselves. That also doesn't mean we should be pointing our fingers to the others and saying, look, these are examples of how, you know, this phenomenon manifests. It's rather a question of us sort of looking at ourselves and just really praying that this might not happen. And this is again where we invoke the teaching and invoke the teacher's blessing, that we may get over this insensitive, stubborn, habitual pattern. Okay. So probably most of you know this, but Mapa, Lord Mapa, we could say is very much the father of the Kagyu tradition as we have it in Tibet. Mapa was a tremendous character really in Tibetan Buddhism, and one of the early masters who traveled from Tibet and studied in India. He studied with a great teacher called Naropa, and he also studied, as we should see here, with some other teachers, including Matripa and Kukuripa. He then basically apprenticed with these teachers for years in India, translated the teachings back in Tibet, and through several great students, notably Milarepa, but also others such as Ngok Dorje and others, established this lineage that is known as the Kagyu lineage. We have two kinds of Kagyu lineages. We've looked at that earlier. One is what we then call the Kagyu lineage from Mapa, and then also the Kagyu lineage from what we call the Shangpa, which is then a great master called Kyungpo Naljo. But anyway, these teachings, they go back to this great Siddha that you see on your left, who is then known as Tilopa. And and so key in the Vajrayana is really the teacher and the living tradition in which the gurus are not seen as external, but rather the manifestation of awakening that has manifested within our lives. And so the practice of invoking, praising the teacher is really fundamental to the entire practice of the Vajrayana. So here Mapa then praises his deity, Sri Heruka Chakrasambhara, and also and then the various teachers. So we're going to look at that here. So Mapa writes, Lord Akshobhya, Mahasukakaya, united with Vajradakini, chief of Dakas, Sri Heruka, I praise you and prostrate. So in the Vajrayana, the nature of enlightenment is not just left as an abstract quality of the non-grasping and the freedom from conceptual constructs, which of course is the very pinnacle of the understanding of reality, and this is the scope of the general sutra teachings. But it's also this quality of what we could call shunyata, or emptiness. We also would call it the emptiness endowed with all the supreme aspects. It possesses this cognitive or awake quality of Buddha nature. And in the Vajrayana, this is engaged in the form of deity, in form of the untainted quality that manifests out of this ground of enlightenment. And so all along in the Vajrayana, we again and again invoke enlightenment in the form of deity. And in this case, the principal practice then of Tilopa, and also of many of the masters of the Kaji lineage, is then Chakrasambhara. So you see here up in the right-hand corner of the Tanka, you see this deity. It's not that clear, perhaps. It's a small image, but this is then what we refer to as the two-armed Chakrasambhara. And so Mapa is supplicating and praising, essentially praising the Buddha, praising enlightenment, praising the Heruka, or the principal deity. So he then praises the masters of the lineage. So he says, collector of commands and secret mantras, possessor of the secret, propagator of the holy Dharma in the world of men, Lord Nagarjuna, father and son, I praise you. So the entire Mahayana is very much indebted to Nagarjuna, and from Nagarjuna we have the lion's roar of the middle way teaching that in no way attributes reality to any phenomena, external or internal, subject or object. And this middle way wisdom is also basic to the Vajrayana. And Nagarjuna was a Mahasiddha. Nagarjuna was someone who received the treasure teaching of the Prajnaparamita from the Nagas on the basis of his practice of mantra. And and we speak about Nagarjuna in terms of a Mahayana teacher, but also in terms of being a great Mahasiddha. And so here it says Nagarjuna, father and son. I'm not sure exactly what that would mean, but it would presumably refer to Aryadeva, who was the principal student of Nagarjuna and someone who continued to expound the Madhyamika teaching. But I'm not entirely certain about this. If you read in the Reign of Wisdom, there's a narrative about Tilopa, who goes to seek teaching from Nagarjuna, and then he goes to where Nagarjuna lives, but then he meets someone called Matangi, and Matangi says Nagarjuna has gone to teach. I think it says he had gone to teach the Nagas, but he left me here as his representative. And so Tilopa then studies with Matangi as his teacher, takes him as his guru and studies with him. So it's possible that when we speak about Nagarjuna, father and son, then in the context of the Vajrayana, there's a different way that we understand the lineage and the sort of, you could say, the succession of teachings. But anyway, Nagarjuna is one of the forefathers of certainly of the Mahayana and also of the Vajrayana. And it says, you who bring down the overwhelming Vajra thunderbolt, the kind one who protects from fear, Tilopa, Lord of the three levels, who has attained supreme siddhi, I praise you. So this is then invoking Tilopa as Lord of the three levels. I think we would speak of this in terms of possibly the three realms, but also sometimes we talk about the three levels in terms of the beings that we have in space, those that inhabit the earth, and also those that live below the earth. And then particularly then Tilopa is the father of the Kagyu lineage. So from Tilopa we talk about the various transmissions, the four transmissions, and all the teachings such as the yogas and so forth, and particularly then of course the Mahamudra teaching, which we say that Tilopa got from Vajradhara sometimes, and also we would talk about how Tilopa received this teaching in Udayana from the Queen of the Dakinis. So Tilopa is one of the great Mahasiddhas of India. He's also counted among the 84 Mahasiddhas. And so Tilopa's main student was then Naropa. And then the praise continues. Undergoing 12 trials, attending the Guru, all the Pitakas and Tantras, you realized in an instant, Lord Buddha in human form, I praise you. So this is Marpa's particular praise then of Naropa, who was Tilopa's principal student, or at least as far as the Kagyu lineage is concerned, he is then the student who received the teaching from Tilopa and passed it on to Marpa and others. And it refers here to the 12 trials. So probably most of you know this story, and if not, you can find a work. It's from the 1960s or 70s, translated by Herbert Gunther, and it's called The Life and Teaching of Naropa. It's a really remarkable story. Naropa's story is very, very interesting, and I think also in many times that Chögyam Trungpa has taught on this. But Naropa was a very great scholar. He was what we say head of the northern gate of Nalanda, and a very famous and accomplished teacher. And he got a prophecy to go and study with Tilopa, his guru. And so he left his position at Nalanda and attended Tilopa for a number of years, undergoing a lot of hardships. Tilopa would say things like, if I really had a student, he wouldn't hesitate to jump off this roof. They were standing on top of a temple. And Tilopa said, if I really had a student, he wouldn't hesitate to just jump off this roof. And Naropa would just do it. He wouldn't hesitate. And then he obviously would be in a tremendous pain and in quite a state. And the story tells that Tilopa would sort of saunter over to him and say, "Are you okay?" And Naropa would answer, "I'm due to my attachment to my physical form. I am in a lot of pain." And so then Tilopa would say, "That's such a shame. You should rather look at your nature, which is the primordial form of the yogini, the dakini." And having said that, he would then heal him, and so Naropa would be fit afterwards. But essentially, there were 12 such incidents where Naropa was underwent what we call these 12 what is it again? 12 acts, 12 trials. And then it says here, you realized in an instant. Well, yes, after all these trials, then there was this instant where one day Tilopa slept. Tilopa slapped Naropa on the side of the head with his sandal. And at that point, Naropa had complete awakening. So Naropa is the model, quintessential model of somebody who really had all the conditions there for being the perfect Vajrayana student. He had all the theoretical background as a great scholar, and also then this complete devotion and trust in his teacher. So that's such a great Mahasiddha, great student. Then it says, indestructible form of Mahamudra, possessing the uncontrived primordial essence, realizing the truth of the bliss of simplicity, Lord Prince Mitripa, I praise at your feet. And this is another great master, another great Mahasiddha that Mapa studied with, Mitripa. Mitripa was also a very great scholar and also a great Mahasiddha. And there are some stories. I don't know a whole lot about Mitripa. I know that he wrote some commentaries on Saraha's praises, and also there's a famous story of two stories associated with Atisha. One is where Atisha expelled him because of his yogic behavior from one of the, I guess it was Nalanda or Dantapuri, I'm not sure, Bikramashila maybe. But anyway, Atisha had to expel Mitripa because his behavior just didn't really conform with the monastic context. And yet when Atisha was in Tibet, he got word that Mitripa had passed away, and he bowed to India, and he says, in the direction of India, and he said, this is such a shame, because in India there was only really two people who could distinguish between some of the teachings, the difference between the different teachings that exist in India and then Buddhism. And he says, I'm one, and the other was Mitripa. So Atisha had tremendous respect for Mitripa. But anyway, the teaching of Mitripa then is passed down from Mapa and still being taught within the Kagyu lineage. And then there's another praise, expounding the doctrine of the command lineage, attaining the city of the profound Guya Samaj. You are endowed with compassion and wisdom. Janagarbha, I praise at your feet. Janagarbha, also somebody very important, as somebody who really brought together the two strands of Mahayana that we call the lineage of the profound view and the lineage of the vast conduct, also what we call the Madhyamika and the Yogacarya. And so we have what is known as the Svatantrika Madhyamikans, who teach relative truth according to the Yogacarya and absolute truth according to the general Madhyamika, Prasangika Madhyamika. So this is quite important. And also in Tibet, this lineage was then continued by someone called Shantarakshita at the time of when Buddhism was established in Tibet. But anyway, this was also then a teacher of Mapa. And then it says, dwelling in the charnel grounds, solitudes and under trees, a kusulu, savoring potency, possessing the miracle of traveling in space. Kukuripa, I praise you. So Kukuripa was famously a siddha that was surrounded by dogs, or so it appeared. For those with pure vision, they would understand that what appeared to be dogs externally were actually dakinis. But Kukuripa was one of Mapa's teachers, and there's a story about Mapa approaching Kukuripa and wanting teaching. I mean, he was very ambitious and wanting these teachings from Kukuripa, and Kukuripa would talk to him in complete nonsense language, complete gibberish. And I think this is actually from Trungpa's story. Then Mapa would become increasingly frustrated with not being able to get a single sensible word out of Kukuripa. And this went on for quite some time, and Mapa essentially was at the point of giving up and having lost all his ambition and all his sort of his agendas and so forth. He was just basically in a mess. And at that point, then Kukuripa began to speak completely, in a comprehensible way. And so this being indicative of the moment that these ambitions fall away and we become real, then the teaching can be transmitted. But Kukuripa had to put Marpa through this process really first in order to enable the transmission to take place. Having realized the truth of abundance, possessing the potency of moonbeams, you satisfy and bring bliss to those who see you. Yogini, I praise you. So this is praising the wisdom principle, which is basic to the Vajrayana. This is praise, could be seen as a praise to Vajrayogini, and it could also be seen as a praise to a particular friend on the path that I think Marpa refers to in the Reign of Wisdoms. There's Marpa expressing his sorrow at leaving India and leaving behind his partner, who was a great practitioner. So I think this could be then also implicitly a reference to his companion on the path. Resting in the shade of the excellent umbrella, adorned with golden ribbons, seated in the sky, attaining mastery over the sun and moon, Jetsuns of Nepal, I praise you. It's said that when Marpa went to India first time, he stayed in Nepal for some time, and essentially to learn Sanskrit and also to get acclimatized, since Tibet is very high altitude, 3,000 to 5,000 meters generally, and coming down to India would very often cause a lot of difficulty for Tibetans. Famously, actually, when the Tibetans came out in the late 1950s, the first year that they were in India, about 10% of the Tibetan refugees died from tuberculosis, just because they're not being able to acclimatize to the conditions of India. So Tibetans were coming down from toward going to India. These masters, they would spend time in Nepal, and there were many great masters in Nepal. I think in the Reign of Wisdom there is some reference to somebody called Vasudeva, who was a great master. Anyway, here basically it just says in the plural, then Jetsuns of Nepal, some of his gurus in Nepal. And continues, overcoming the worldly attachment of grasping and fixation, possessing the benefit of attending the Guru, holding principally to the practice of enlightenment, preserving the learning of Mahayana, clearing away obstructions as well as obstacles caused by agents of perversion, the friend who introduces one to the good Guru, guiding masters, I praise you. So then these are all the conducive circumstances that have led him to meet the teachers, the various what we call Kalyana Mitras, the general teachers who provided the understanding of the Dharma, the necessity for overcoming worldly attachment, meaning renunciation, and also introducing the view of the Mahayana, as well as the practical ways to eliminate what needs to be removed in terms of obscurations and obstacles, and bringing about what needs to be realized. So all these conducive circumstances and teachers then Marpa praises. And then it concludes, the merit of praising the Guru is equal to offering to the Buddhas of the 3 times. By this merit of praising the masters, may all beings attend spiritual friends. So we would say the Guru is no different from the Buddha in terms of wisdom, but the Guru's kindness exceeds the Buddha and the masters of the past in terms of being actually present within our lives. And so there's nothing more important than the Guru. And so there's such enormous merit, such enormous value in praising one's teacher. So that's where the entire Vajrayana really hinges on this introduction to Buddha nature, to the nature of one's mind, that is not understood through books and language, but through the process and the interaction with the teacher. So Mapa, he makes this aspiration that all beings may have that fortune. Okay. All right. So as I mentioned last time, thought it would be quite good to actually look at a very, very helpful and extraordinary teaching from a book called The Heart of the Buddha, and you also have this, of course, in the collected works. And it's a teaching on the practice of Vajrayana. And in here, really, this again is something that, just like the goal of wisdom, and even more, or in some senses, even more specifically, actually clarifies the practice of Vajrayana. So I thought this makes sense, and even though many of us are practicing the tantric preliminaries, the Ngundro, then it makes a lot of sense to have an idea of what actually we're doing with the path. What is the entire Vajrayana about? So there's a few minutes left today, so I'm just going to begin this study, this section of our study, and it's a chapter in this book called The Heart of the Buddha. So it's not that long, but then again, it's a longish chapter. So we'll probably be spending a few weeks on this. So we're talking about sacred outlook, the practice of Vajrayana, and Trungpa just says, experiencing the Vajra mind of Vajrayana is so deep and vast that as thoughts arise, they do not become highlights. They are small fish in a huge ocean of space. So we looked at the section on Mahati, and we've been introduced to this notion of space. And the entire Vajrayana is premised on being introduced to a dimension of our ordinary basic simplicity that abides as our ground nature. And this has a lot to do with engaging and being sensitive to the quality of the teacher, and also identifying this quality as something that we innately possess as well. This comes a lot with the humility and the willingness to undertake the disciplines of the path. And Trungpa is going to be discussing then these foundations. But it does operate also with engaging this in various ways. So as much as this nature of purity is synonymous really with what we could call the Zen of the mind, or the Prajna Paramita, or the middle way, and so forth, the freedom from conceptual constructs. It is engaged skillfully through what we then call the four empowerments of the Vajrayana, where we acknowledge this as the truth that is abiding within us, and yet also with the awareness that we still have fixation on our ordinary phenomena as we experience it, then understanding that these ordinary phenomena, they in their ground nature have not moved from the enlightened condition. We see the whole phenomenal world and also our entire being in terms of purity. And this is what we engage then with the practices of visualization, sadhana, yoga, and so forth, where we engage with the perceptions of the world, the experiences of the world, but very much from the view of the purity of this. And so we have this particularly skillful approach in the Vajrayana of engaging this nature as deity. But of course, here now we're going to look more specifically at what this notion of deity really involves in terms of the Buddhist path. And it's very important for us who engage with the Vajrayana to have an understanding of the unity of all the Buddhist teachings, and to understand how the connection between, for example, the language that we find in Zen or Chan Buddhism and the language of Vipassana, etc., the teachings of the Madhyamaka and Prajnaparamita, how this fits together with the practice of deity in the Vajrayana. Understandably, those outside looking at the Vajrayana would find Vajrayana rather odd and not entirely sure how to fit that together with the rest of Buddhism, and you can't really blame them. But certainly, those of us who are practicing the Vajrayana, it's very important to understand really how this practice of the Vajrayana, the practice of deity and so forth, fits in with the general Buddhist teaching. And this is what Trungpa Rinpoche then will be clarifying here. He says, the Vajrayana, the tantric teachings of the Buddha, contains tremendous magic and power. Its magic lies in its ability to transform confusion and neurosis into awakened mind and to reveal the everyday world as a sacred realm. Its power is that of unerring insight into the true nature of phenomena and of seeing through ego and its deception. So the operative word really here is to unveil the everyday world as a sacred realm. And there is very much in Vajrayana the notion of the sacred. We have to acknowledge that there is a quality of enlightenment that is freeing and that possesses all the wonderful qualities that sentient beings everywhere strive towards: happiness, freedom from delusion, and so forth. And as such, it is sacred, as opposed to the experience of samsara, which is profoundly painful, suffering. So we acknowledge this innate abiding quality as something sacred. And yet it's not something that is beyond what we already experience. It is the true nature of what is. And that's why we're talking about unveiling this world as a sacred realm. But it does require that we need to have the vipassana, have the prajna to see through deception and to actually understand truly what is reality. And we need to go beyond the ordinary projections of ego. So Trungpa Rinpoche says, according to the tantric tradition, the Vajrayana is regarded as the complete teaching of the Buddha. It is the path of complete discipline, complete surrender, and complete liberation. It is important to realize, however, that the Vajrayana is firmly grounded in the basic teachings of the Sutrayana, the teachings of egolessness and compassion. So it's the complete path in terms of here we are engaging with the very scope of enlightenment itself. But we don't engage this just on the basis of wishful thinking or just saying, hey, I'll take that, I'll subscribe to that. But it does require actually a firm ground, an actual processing that has taken place in terms of both understanding and also in terms of practice. And this is where the foundation of the Vajrayana is the very same foundation that runs as a red thread across all the Buddhist teachings, the Sutrayana. Trungpa Rinpoche says, frequently the exceptional strength and efficacy of the Vajrayana are misunderstood as a promise of instant enlightenment. But one cannot become enlightened overnight. In fact, it is highly deceptive and even dangerous to think in such a way. Without exception, the Buddhist teachings point to the erroneous belief in a self or ego as the cause of suffering and obstacle to liberation. All of the great teachers of the past practice the preliminary meditative disciplines diligently before becoming students of the Vajrayana. Without this basic training in the practice of meditation, there is no ground from which to work with the Vajrayana at all. So Vajrayana has possibly a lot of appeal. At the same time, also, it's not something we should engage with in a simple-minded way. And there is very much the sense of this being part of a gradual path. So we need the foundations first. And this particular vision, that is that of the Vajrayana, is the vision of egolessness, of the freedom from the ordinary confused projections onto our reality. So that is where all across the line in all the Buddhist teachings, we talk about seeing through the erroneous belief in a self, ego. So to engage with the Vajrayana without having that experience wouldn't make so much sense. We both need the experience of we need both the experience, the theoretical understanding, and the experience. And we can see this has been like I was referring before to someone like Naropa, his life. We can see how that applied in the life of Naropa. So there's a very real process that takes place. Trungpa says the Vajrayana principle, as it has been experienced, understood, and transmitted by the gurus of the Karma Kagyu lineage of Tibet, to which I belong, is part of the Vajrayana tradition. I feel very honored to have the opportunity to explain the Vajrayana principle and the shrine connected with Vajrayana practice. At the same time, I have a responsibility to the lineage, as well as to the reader, to introduce Vajrayana properly. So we're very fortunate to have this presentation from Chögyam Trungpa. And particularly in the modern world, so much of the Vajrayana is presented through, you could say, the language of perhaps anthropology, perhaps through the language of art history, and essentially the languages that construct the other, the foreign, the ancient. You know, very often we have these sort of sense of this being an amazing cultural heritage, you know, etc., etc. But this is a living tradition, and this is a living tradition of insight that is basic to the liberation, the freedom and happiness of everyone everywhere. So we couldn't think of anything more universal, really, than the Vajrayana, the Vajrayana principle, and so forth. So it's something that is universal, but it requires somebody like Trungpa Rinpoche, master of the lineage, to present it properly in terms of our path, in terms of our experience and our process. So this is where we're approaching Vajrayana very much from the inside. This is Vajrayana from the point of view of Vajrayana herself. So I think we'll leave it. Let's stop here today, and then we'll continue next time. Naropa, Tilopa, yes, okay. Jakob, has anyone ever written a text on the life of Mapa? Any recommended readings? Well, yes. In fact, I think the author was somebody called Sangyan Heruka, who also wrote the life of Milarepa. And it was translated in the 1980s, actually, by the Nalanda Translation Committee. And under the while Trungpa Rinpoche was still alive. So we have the life of Mapa translated, and it's called just that, the life of Mapa, exists in translation. When ambition falls away, transmission can take place. Please discuss the meaning of ambition. Well, ambition can exist on several levels. And I know from if I'm not wrong, I seem to remember Chögyam Trungpa describing how Mapa, as much as he was a great, and this you have in the life of Mapa, as much as he was a great being and so forth, he also had a certain degree of, you could almost say, commercial interest in some of the teachings that he was translating. You see, if you became a translator and you came back to Tibet, you had the chance of having a good livelihood and a certain recognition and so forth. And I think while Mapa already had been somewhat processed, then I think Trungpa Rinpoche, he describes that Mapa still had some agendas in terms of just thinking, I'm a great teacher and I'm accumulating a lot of wonderful teachings here. So that's on the more gross level. But there's also the spiritual level, which we maybe could call spiritual materialism, where we'd like to achieve something. The teaching is very much about enhancing us. So it's not about essentially egolessness, but it's very much spirituality on the terms of ego. So the student is essentially not really ready because the student is not relating with what is real. The student comes dressed up in a spiritual persona or a spiritual image. And so there's not really anything that can take place. As much as the teacher would love to, then the teacher can also see that the student is essentially closed up because of this insecurity, basically, that still applies. Still the need to have some credentials and some sense of, here I am and I'm very qualified. So that's where Mapa needed to go through he needed to go through this process where he actually came down to just being raw and naked. And that's the place where then the teaching can begin, becoming real. At the end, if there is no more questions, can you tell us a little about Niguma and Kyompo Nalcho? Oh, I wish I could. We say that Niguma was, sometimes we refer to her as Mapa's, Naropa's sister. But also we sometimes speculate if that could cover that the sort of the close association was of a different kind, not necessarily as siblings, right? But I think Niguma, if I'm not wrong, she received teachings from Sukasiddhi, a great Mahasiddhi, a great female Mahasiddhi, Siddha. And again, these were the teachings also that came down from Vajradhara. So essentially the teachings of Mahamudra. And it's then from Niguma that Kyompo Nalcho received these teachings. But you know, I have to say, I'm just I'm telling you the very little I know. And I would say, actually, if you just Google these things, you have probably get some pretty substantial answers there. So Kyompo Nalcho was, I forget, but I think he was somebody who was quite accomplished and learned and so forth. And he then traveled to India and studied with Niguma. And I think also, what else did he study with? He might have studied with Naropa also, but his main teacher was then Niguma. So we talk about the 6 yogas of Naropa and the 6 yogas of Niguma. So in the Kagyu tradition, we'd say Mahamudra, which represents prajna or wisdom, is then accompanied by the skillful means approach of the 6 yogas. And in the case then for men, we would say the 6 yogas of Naropa, and for women then the 6 yogas of Niguma. I think we've exhausted my knowledge of Niguma and Kyompo Nalcho at this point. But just recently we were looking at these persons, and I remember digging out a bit of information, and these are extraordinary lives. I think actually Sarah Harding has translated. That's right. Sarah Harding has translated the life of Nigoma. So you have recourse to details about her life there. There would also be some works of Trungpa Rinpoche. But you see, you then have these two great lineages of the Kagyu, then the Mapa Kagyu, which is then what Trungpa Rinpoche is coming from, what we call also from the Mapa Kagyu, we have the teachers, teachers Milarepa and his student Gambopa, and then Gambopa had 4 students from which we then have 4 major Kagyu lineages, and then again one of these Pamodrupa, he had 8 students, and then we have 8 lesser Kagyu lineages. But some of these lesser Kagyu lineages are actually very big, like the Drigong and the Drupa. But the Karma Kagyu then comes from Gambopa's student, Kampa Use, who was the first Kamapa. And so that's the Karma Kagyu lineage. And then you have the Shangpa Kagyu, which in recent time was actually held by the late Kalu Rinpoche. He was the first Tibetan Lama I met, from whom I received refuge. But Kalu Rinpoche was what we call the Shangdak. He was a Kagyu master, but then the holder of the Shangpa Kagyu. Yeah. Then someone says, I didn't know Nagarjuna was actually a Vajrayana master. I thought he was a Mahayana master. Interesting. Yeah. No, we would say that Nagarjuna had actually the foundation for Nagarjuna as a Mahayana master is his exposition, or his bringing out the Prajnaparamita teachings from the realm of the Nagas, which is quite extraordinary in itself, but that is how we universally across the Mahayana acknowledge the role of Nagarjuna. And then, of course, his exposition of the Prajnaparamita teaching through his then particular Madhyamika, and particularly the Mula Madhyamika Karika and so on. But that he could bring out these teachings is also said to be that he did that because of his abilities as a great tantric master, that then was able to, I think, on the basis of his practice, he manifested all this gold that he then brought to the Naga realm and made offerings to the Nagas, and then he received the Prajnaparamita teachings. However, Western scholarship has a slightly different take, and some of the writings that are attributed to Nagarjuna are then some would say there was an earlier and a later Nagarjuna, but that's more within the realm of Western scholarship. They have a slightly different take on these things. But I think within the tradition we talk about both the Mahayana master and the Tantric master. So the Tantric master Nagarjuna and the Mahayana master Nagarjuna is regarded as the same one. Yeah. There's a work by Nagarjuna which is called in praise of the bodhicitta, which is a praise of Buddha nature. And so I think some of the modern scholars they would say this is not the same person as the one who wrote the Mula Madhyamika Karika. But then again, Western scholarships operate with a slightly different optics, a different reality. So, when we come across the lives of Vajrayana masters, the Mahasiddhas and so on, it very much takes place within a different scope of reality. It's a lot more wiggle room, really. A lot more room for what we, from a conventional point of view, would call magic. but what really just constitutes a mastery over the phenomenal world. Anyway, we'll look more at this next time. So looking forward to studying this with you. It's an extraordinary text. So like I say, you can find this in the Heart of the Buddha and also in the collected works. And then originally this was, I think I mentioned last time, this was published as part of a catalog that was called the Silk Route and the Diamond Way. And it was an art collection that traveled throughout, various museums and galleries. And part of that exhibition was then the Vajrayana shrine. So Trungpa Rinpoche, he basically wrote this explanation for that purpose. Okay. See you next time. We'll dedicate. Through this virtue may all beings throughout existence awaken together without a single being left behind. In the pure realm of the luminous essence, the ground of the great perfection, may they remain inseparable from the kayas and wisdoms. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together.